Hello students, hopefully all of you are doing very well. Today we'll talk about the chapter called the Reserve Bank of Australia and Interest Rate. And I am Dr. Sharat Khandaka, who will give lecture on this topic. Now, before going to the topic, we'll talk about first what is the measures of the money supply. Now, when we're talking about the measures of money supply, let's look at the Australian dollars and US dollar exchange rate since 1900. If you look into this chart or a figure, you will find that Australian dollar and US dollar exchange rate was quite flat during 1900 till 1929. However, then it started becoming volatile of the exchange rate for Australian dollar and the US dollar. However, if you look more recent information, you will find that Australian dollar and US dollar was more volatile recently. And if you look at the data from 2011 and 12, you will find that one Australian dollar was buying more than one US dollar. So the exchange rate during that time was one Australian dollar was buying 1.1 US dollar. However, in 2019, in the month of March, the current exchange rate is about 70 cents. So one Australian dollar is buying only 70 US cents. Now, why there is a huge volatility in Australian dollars and US dollar exchange rate? So when you look at the volatility of the exchange rate, we need to understand a few things. So there are some more important things in here. So why there is a volatility of US dollar and Australian dollar? Is volatility a good thing for the economy? So to understand all of this, so we'll discuss our today's topic. The first thing what we need to understand is what is called the official cash rate. So the official cash rate, or OCR, is interest rate paid by the banks to the overnight money market in Australia and New Zealand. Though the regulated use of the exchange and so the cash rate is the rate which is based on the overnight money market or money supply for the Australian and New Zealand banks. Now, we know about the cash rate, and this is a very big issue in Australia because every month Reserve Bank of Australia, they sit together and they decide about the cash rate. Currently, in 2019, in the month of March, the current cash rate in Australia is 1.5%. Now, my question is, the cash rate, which is 1.5%, is it the interest rate of the normal bank, or it is the rate between the banks? Through the regulated use of exchange settlement account, a central bank is able to adjust the interest rate of the nation's economy. So OCR, or the official cash rate, cannot be changed by the transaction between the financial institution, as this does not change the supply of money, only its location. So only transfer between the central bank and the institution can affect the cash rate. The RBA's measurement of money supply. The RBA can control the liquidity in the financial market. That's what we learned in our last lecture. It does so through the managing of the exchange and settlement account held by the banks at the RBA's exchange and settlement account. So every commercial bank, they have an exchange and settlement account with the Reserve Bank of Australia, and RBA controls the liquidity situation of the financial system through the exchange and settlement account. The exchange and settlement fund are the fund used to settle obligation among institutions and between the institutions and the RBA. By controlling the exchange and settlement fund, the RBA is able to control the money supply. So the money supply change. How does the money supply changes taking place? So the money supply can change as a result of the government taxes and spending, government transactions in Commonwealth government security and the foreign exchange, regulation and the government policy, and deregulation of the foreign exchange market. So all of these factors can actually affect the money supply. For example, look at the first point, government taxes and spending. So if the government increase the taxes, so it means the more money out of the business and going to the government fund. So some money out from the market. So it will impact the money supply. The same way, the government transaction in the Commonwealth government securities and foreign exchange. So if the government sell some Commonwealth government security in the market, then excess money will be out from the market. Or if the government decided to buy it back, the Commonwealth government security or CGS, then there will be excess money in the market. So the liquidity position of the market will grow or will go up. So these are the ways that the money supply can change. So the RBA's influence over the interest rate can include controlling the cash rate. Now, as we know that the RBA meets about 11 times in a year, except the month of January, and they decide about the cash rate. So the cash rate is important because it measures the return on the most liquid of the financial asset or the bank reserves. It is integral to the monetary policy, and which is a very important part, and it directly reflects the available reserve in the banking system, which influence banks' decision on the loan. Therefore, the RBA has a strong influence on the interest rate. So what is the market equilibrium interest rate? So the RBA decides a level for the cash rate that is appropriate, and they meet monthly. So they decide what is the appropriate cash rate for that particular country. So the RBA wants a cash rate that will be appropriate and that will have an impact on the growth of the economy. RBA do not want that the inflation will go up rapidly. So the current target inflation rate of RBA is about 2 to 3%. And Australia is actually reaching this 2 to 3% inflation rate last couple of years, which is a very good situation for the RBA. So RBA will be looking for the inflation rate, they will be looking for the unemployment rate, and RBA will be also looking for the cash rate. So the cash rate is determined by the supply and demand. So how much money has been demanded in the market, and do we need to have more or we have the equivalent supply. So it is basically determine the market, and the RBA can manipulate the supply side to ensure that the actual cash rate corresponds to the level it has decided is appropriate. Now the question is, how does it happen? It happens through the exchange and settlement account. Balance changes continuously each day, as we know. The RBA manages the supply of exchange and settlement account funds in order to maintain an equilibrium at the target cash rate. However, if the RBA wants the cash rate to fall, it increases supply to the exchange and settlement fund or the vice versa. So let's have a look how does it happen. Now in this figure, in the left hand side they are paying banks, and on the right hand side the receiving banks. For example, the paying bank includes A, B, C and D. At the same time, the receiving bank also includes A, B, C and D. For example, bank A will receive $4 from bank B, $3 from bank C and $0 from bank D. The same way, Bank B will receive $10 from Bank A, $7 from Bank C, and $8 from Bank D. Bank C will receive $5 from Bank A, $1 from Bank B, and $4 from Bank D. Bank D will receive $0 from Bank A, $6 from Bank B, $2 from Bank C, and $0 from its own bank. The same way, in the left hand side, they are paying banks. So Bank A will pay to Bank B $10, Bank C $5, and Bank D $0. Bank B will pay to Bank A $4, C $1, and D $6. So if you do the total payment calculation, you will find Bank A needs to pay $15, Bank B needs to pay $11, Bank C needs to pay $12, and Bank D needs to pay $12. In the receiving side, Bank A will receive $7, Bank B will receive $25, Bank C will receive $10, and Bank D will receive $8. So if Bank A receives $7 and need to pay $15, then the net position will be negative $8. At the same way, Bank B will receive $25 from different banks. However, it needs to pay $11. So its net position is plus $14. Bank C needs to pay $10 to other banks, but it will have a payment of $12. So it will receive $10 and pay $12, so its net position is -2. Bank D will receive $8 from other banks. However, it needs to pay $12, so its net position is $4. So at the end of the day, through the payment system, there will be $8 minus from the exchange and settlement account of Bank B. $14 will be included in the exchange and settlement account of Bank B. $2 will be deducted from Bank C, and then $4 will be deducted from Bank D. However, if any particular bank doesn't have sufficient fund, it can borrow money from another bank. For example, if Bank A needs to borrow some money, so they can go to the Bank B and can borrow some money. However, when Bank A will borrow money from Bank B, it needs to pay an interest rate. So which interest rate it will be applicable? Is it the cash rate or the market interest rate? Now remember that it will be always the cash rate. So managing fund through the open market operation. So RBA manages fund through the exchange and settlement account and in the open market. So each day RBA staff estimate the likely net settlement obligation between exchange and settlement account holders and the RBA. The RBA decide what supply adjustment is necessary to maintain the cash rate at the targeted level. The RBA announce whether it intends to buy or to sell security. Now it will be depending upon the demand and supply. When the RBA will buy or sell the security, the dealers will have 15 minutes to communicate their bids or the offer to the RBA, and then these bids or offers are ranked and best deals accepted to supply the required exchange and settlement account funds or soak up the excess money from the market. Now this is how the RBA maintain in money supply through the exchange and settlement account in the open market. Now in this slide, it shows the cash rate of Australian of RBA. In this slide, the cash rate of RBA has been showing. This slide shows the cash rate of RBA from 2000 to 2012. So if you look into the cash rate, you'll find that during 2001, the cash rate was around 6%. However, it significantly dropped from 2001 to 2006, but in 2007, the cash rate, which is this side, goes to about 7%, and then it starts sinking, the cash rate. Now, if you look into the market in 2019, at the month of March, the current cash rate is about 1.5%. So there are three objectives of monetary policy which the RBA tries to achieve. Number one is stability of currency of Australia. Number two is the maintenance of full employment in Australia. And number three is the economic prosperity and welfare of the people of Australia. So the number one is the price stability. So the price stability is the stability of an average price of all goods and services in the economy. Now, when we're talking about the price stability, we also need to talk about the inflation. So the inflation is a continuously rise in the average price level, affect the economic welfare of individuals. So every year we look for the consumer price index. So it's called the CPI, and then the RBA try to find out what is the inflation of the country. Now, when we're looking for the inflation since 1993, the monetary policy has been focused on keeping the inflation rate between 2 to 3% per annum in Australia. And when there is a higher inflation, that time the unintended transfer of the purchasing power has been taken the place. Now, since Australia's inflation is about 2 to 3% since 1993, which is a very good economic situation for the prosperity of Australia and the price stability. Now, when we're talking about the inflation is calculated by the one major method, and that method is there will be a base year. So the price of the previous year or the current year will be compared with the base year's price. So RBA have a basket of all goods. Now, each basket can capture as many as 10,000 goods and compare the prices of current year or the previous years with the base year. So if the price has a huge change, and then what percent of change has taken the place. So that is how the inflation has been captured. We look at this graph, you'll find the consumer price inflation for Australia has been showing. So the consumer price inflation from 1900 till 2016. So if you look at the inflation graph, you'll find around 1950, so around 1945 to 1950, the inflation was very high, and it was as high as 25%. However, since then the inflation declined, and current inflation rate somewhere here, so which is the targeted inflation, 2 to 3%. Now this slide shows the consumer price inflation of the USA from 1951 till 2014. So if you look to the US inflation, you'll find that during 80s, or just before the 80s, the consumer price inflation of the USA was about 13%. And then it has significantly dropped. And currently, the consumer price inflation in the USA is around 2%. This slide shows the consumer price inflation in Europe, which includes European country, Euro and Iceland. And their targeted inflation rate is about 2 to 3% as well. Full employment. So when we're looking for the objective of the monetary policy, one of the main objectives of the monetary policy to have a full employment. Now, what is the definition of the full employment? Now, the definition of full employment means that every person who is willing to do the work or looking for work has an employment opportunity for him. So it means that the full employment is every person of the working age who wishes to work can find unemployment, because people are continuously entering and leaving to the employment. There is always a natural rate of unemployment, and we cannot ignore the natural rate of unemployment. Generally, most of the country who have almost a full employment, they still have some natural level of unemployment, which is around 4% to 5%. So policymakers in Australia aim to maintain an unemployment rate of 5%, which is very good. During the global financial crisis, the unemployment rate peaked in Australia about 5.8%. However, the rate has been declined. So currently, the unemployment rate in Australia is around 5%. So your task will be, what is the current unemployment rate? Find it out. How are you going to find it out? Look at so your current task is to find out what is the current unemployment rate in Australia. How you're going to find it out? Look at the ABS website, which is www.abs.gov.au. Now, in this figure is showing the unemployment rate across the globe, specifically the European countries. Now, European countries, specifically the Eastern European countries, used to have high unemployment rate, and the West European countries have lower unemployment rate. Economic growth. So economic growth is an expansion and development of an economy. So, and this is one of the main objectives of the monetary policy. The RBA manages its monetary policy so that it contributes to the economic prosperity in Australians. Now, in this slide, we can look at the economic growth from 1997 till 2009, and if you can look that the economic growth in Australia is around 2 to 3% per year, and which is a good growth rate for a developed nation. Sometimes you can find that some emerging market, they have very high growth rate. Now, one thing to remember, the economic growth of a developing nation or an emerging market can be significantly superior than the developed nation. Let's take an example of China and India. China has a growth rate more than double digit before 2018. The same goes for India. India's growth rate was around 9 to 10% before 2018. However, if you look at their growth rate, it has been significantly declined, and China's growth rate is now in single number or single digit, and India's growth rate is about 6%. The same way it goes for Bangladesh or Vietnam or some East European countries, where their growth rate was almost a double figure or around 8 or 9%. However, their growth rate deteriorated last few years, and they're having a growth rate around 6 to 7% now. Now, why it's happened like that? Now, this is a very common situation in any country in the world. When the economy is growing, to have a very superior growth rate is almost impossible. If you look into the example of the Second World War, after the Second World War, the economic growth rate of Japan and Germany was unbelievable, and they used to call the Japanese economic miracle or German economic miracles, because their growth rate was double digit for a number of years. However, if you look into the growth rate of Japan now, which is almost 0% or negative 1%. The same way, if you look into the growth rate of Germany, their growth rate is about 1%. So when a country became significant, when an economy of a country becomes significantly bigger and the per capita income grew a very large number, it is always difficult for a country to manage the same growth rate. However, we discuss about the main three objectives of the monetary policy, which includes the prosperity of the Australian people. One is the stable currency, and another objective was another monetary objective was the full employment. However, there are conflict among the goals. There is always a trade-off in short run between the full employment and stable price, because when there is full employment, the inflation will go up. When the inflation will go up, the price stability will be deteriorated. So the Reserve Bank will try to increase the interest rate, which will bring down the inflation. However, when we'll have higher interest rate, it will be conflicting among the between the price stability and the unemployment. Essentially, when the employment decreases, inflation goes up, and the vice versa. As such, the RBA must perform a careful balancing act to ensure that neither employment nor the inflation become too high. So there are always conflict among the goals, and there is a trade-off. So the monetary policy transmission and the economic activity can be done through different channels. One is the business investment, second is the consumer spending, and third is the net export. When you're talking about the business spending, when the interest rate changes, business spending tends to be affected. For example, when the rise of the interest rate, the return of the investment in new plant and equipment will fall, and the financial cost will increase, because when the interest rate rise, a percentage of the profit will go towards the increased cost. Therefore, when the interest rate rise, investment spending may fall, and vice versa. The same thing will happen also for the consumer spending. When interest rate changes, consumer spending will be affected. For example, when the rate rise, borrowing became more expensive, because when the rate rise, it will be very expensive for the investor to borrow money, because an extra amount of money will go towards the servicing of the loan. So servicing the payment on the existing loan become more expensive, and the value of the financial security will also fall. And it will have also a similar types of impact on the net export. Changing in interest rate will affect the value of Australian dollar. When rate increases, the Australian dollar tend to increase its value, and the demand for import increases and the demand for export decreases. So just think about it. If the Australian dollar tend to increase its value against the US dollar, then the demand for the import will increase, because Australian dollar will value more in the international market. So one Australian dollar will buy more things in the international market, so the import will increase, and the demand of the export will decrease, because then the Australian product which is produced in Australia will be more expensive to the other country people, so they will consume less Australian product. As import increases related to the export, income also decreases during the same time. Therefore, when interest rate increase, net exports falls, and so does the income. That's all for today. Hopefully you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you very much listening to me, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.